Myth number 5. If you think sex is disgusting or you're repulsed by it, you have a mental problem that makes you asexual. Okay, so I'm sex positive myself. I've even been hired to write articles about it. And what I mean by sex positive is that I think sexual relationships are totally healthy and I'm not disgusted by their very existence just because I don't want them for myself. But excluding people who aren't willing to live and let live when it comes to sexuality, there are those who squick easily when sex is mentioned or displayed or offered, and unfortunately, sometimes asexuals who feel this way get the hairy eyeball and get told they have a problem and should see a doctor because they shouldn't be grossed out by sex. Well, all I can say is there are plenty of people who support the existence of newborn babies but don't want to watch one get born. And while I can safely say I'm sex positive and can handle watching something fairly tasteful happen in a movie, I'm really put off by mouth noise or squishy sex sounds, and I'd definitely be very repulsed if someone tried to do something sexual to me. That doesn't mean I, or anyone more sensitive than I am about these things, is actually suffering from a fear response or an inappropriate disgust response that needs to be fixed. There are asexuals out there who are willing to have sex or even enjoy it, even though they're not sexually attracted to their partners. But that doesn't mean people who don't want to see it, be near it, or hear about it are actually just huge prudes, rather than legitimately asexual. I think most straight guys would be grossed out if they were forced into exposure to gay sex, especially if they were involved, and I doubt they'd say it makes them homophobic just because they don't want to do it. Myth number 6. If you have a libido, or if you masturbate, you can't be asexual. So a lot of people get sex drive and sexual attraction mixed up. For a lot of sexual people, those things are linked. So for people like asexuals, who might experience one and not the other, it might seem confusing. But the truth is, people can have a libido but not be attracted to anyone, and can be quite satisfied with taking care of their sex drive without involving a partner. Some people, like Holly here says in one of her videos, identify as self-sexual or libidoist, and that doesn't make them less asexual, because asexuality is about lack of sexual attraction to others. A lot of detractors are looking for reasons to write asexuals off as just having some problem, and sometimes people with a libido get looked at as if they're just repressed because they don't want to satisfy their drives with someone else's assistance. But wait a second now, who made those people God? In any case, I've said in one of my other videos that I don't happen to be a libidoist asexual, and I think one of the things I said seems a bit misleading, even though I immediately clarified it. I said that some people would call an asexual who masturbates an autosexual instead of an asexual because masturbation is a sexual behavior. I do not believe that masturbation is necessarily asexual behavior, though. I was saying that some people believe it is and wrongly assign libidoist asexuals a complex instead of acknowledging their legitimacy as asexuals. Many asexuals push the happy button because they think it feels good, similar to how little kids aren't thinking about boobies or whatever if they play with themselves. Masturbation doesn't have to be sexual, and even if a libidoist asexual uses visual aids or has fantasies, that doesn't mean that person's expressing sexual attraction. So, long story short, nobody's less asexual for having a sex drive. And those guys are also a pretty good piece of ammunition for the argument that an asexual isn't just a person whose parts are broken. Masturbation seems to be enough for libidoist asexuals, but somehow, I've noticed that most sexual people who masturbate don't find it a substitute for looking for a sexual partner. Like the libidoist asexual, they may be doing it to relieve a sex drive, but the difference for the asexual is that a sex drive is all it is. Myth number 7. If you're below 20 and not interested in sex, you're a late bloomer, not an asexual. If you're past 40 and not interested in sex, you've just lost your sex drive. So yeah, I'm happily past that point in my life when people used to tell me one day I'd see that I was mistaken about my own orientation because I was surely going to grow out of it. As of this recording, I'm 33, and that's a bit old to be a late bloomer, but I was right about my orientation at the time I first started speaking out about it too, and just because some teenagers grow up and realize they do develop an interest in sex, it isn't fair to be abusive and dismissive toward younger asexuals just because it's possible their maturation will result in a change of orientation. You might as well do that to a straight kid and badger him about how you think it's a little early for him to be deciding that he isn't gay. teens are describing how they feel if they identify as asexual, and sexual people, especially the teens' parents and friends, are doing the worst possible thing if they refuse to be receptive to the idea until they pass some magic age. Don't write off asexual teens, because it's not your place to tell them they're too young to know. If they're actually asexual, they're figuring out that that's the case at the same time other kids are exploring their sexuality, and nobody's doing them any favors by denying their experience. If you do that to them, you're instilling a core of self-doubt in them during their formative years. This is one of the worst things you can do to a young asexual, and you have no reason to believe or express that they most likely can't trust their own feelings. Sad thing is, almost all of us had it done to us, and that's part of the reason so many of us are insecure about it for a long time. Victoria here started making awareness videos for asexuality as a young teen, and as you can imagine, she hears "you'll grow out of it" a lot. If she does turn out to be sexually interested in others when she's older, I'm sure she'll find happiness. If she doesn't, do you really want to be one of the people who helped tell her she wasn't qualified to describe her own feelings? As for older asexuals, most of them have spent their lives being told they failed as human beings in not mating when they were younger, and blaming it on a side effect of aging is quite an insult, especially since a lot of the time, older asexuals describe having known they were asexual in their younger years too, except that they had less support than the internet-savvy younger generation of asexuals today, and therefore ended up being pressured into marriages, relationships, or experiences they didn't want, just because they thought it wasn't okay to be asexual. It's quite an insult to turn around on these people and tell them they finally made it through "you'll grow out of it," only to get "that's supposed to happen at your age, just get some Viagra." Yes, some people's sex drive dwindles with age, but since I think I've established that sex drive doesn't define asexuality, now we have a non sequitur. Myth number 8. If you're ugly or socially awkward, you have no choice but to be asexual. When I debunked that whole "you're only not having sex because you can't get laid" excuse in one of my videos, my primary argument was, yeah, I could, and that was really all I had to say about it, because I was mainly focused on why that was a stupid argument for me. After all, people are always chucking compliments at me, and I got asked out and got a lot of male attention in high school even though I didn't want it, and even though I'm well aware I'm no supermodel. A bit short for that, folks. I only ever got messages like, "I'm sure you're too ugly to get a pity screw," if people couldn't see me. In our society, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, thin girl who looks like this can rest assured that if she wanted a guy to sleep with her, she wouldn't be searching long. Now, I'm glad that possessing some of the traits the media finds admirable allows me to come off as legitimate to them, but the problem with this argument is that it ignores how totally irrelevant being able to get laid is when it comes to not being sexually attracted to people. First off, ugly people can get laid. The odds are against them, but it happens, and even if supposedly ugly people had to settle for other supposedly ugly people, I doubt they'd find it preferable to pretend to be asexual. See, because the asexual community is very diverse, we of course have some very attractive people in it, and by nature we will also have some people who are not attractive in the traditional sense. And there's so much wrong with blaming unattractive asexuals' appearance for their asexuality that it's hard to know where to start. First, it suggests that sex is something everyone secretly wants, and that the only people who pretend not to want it are people who couldn't get it anyway. Second, it suggests that only people who could take it or leave it have proof that they actually don't want it. And lastly, it plays into that stereotype that not having sex is just part of being physically unattractive. I have trouble imagining how different I might feel about myself if I was always being abused for not being suitable for sex based on some criteria outside my control. I have this easy excuse at this point where I have reasonable proof that I'm not having sex because I don't want to, not because no one will have me, but some other people would not have as easy a time getting laid if they wanted to. And opponents of asexuality as a legitimate orientation are quick to point out how many of us can't be taken seriously because of our appearance. So basically, my response to "you just can't get laid" shouldn't be "oh yes, I could so." My response should be, would it matter either way if I couldn't? After all, if my point is I don't want to, isn't whether I could totally irrelevant? Myth number 9. If you want a romantic relationship, you're not asexual. So, another article I wrote discusses the difference between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. Yes, some people want the relationship aspect without the sex, and yes, those people are just as asexual as those of us who happen to not want any relationships. Unfortunately, Even though they at least don't have to deal with the stigma that they might be antisocial or incapable of forming human relationships, these people are still treated like they're just sexual people who have something wrong with them. People expect you to be able to consummate the relationship, and some people suggest you have no right to be in a relationship if you're not giving it up. Aromantic people like me are easier for the sexual population to understand because it's just kind of clear-cut. They don't have to try to imagine what romance could possibly be like without sexual intimacy. But as soon as people show up who just don't want to have sex with the people they love, suddenly their orientation is doubted. Jenny's a romantic asexual who's been in relationships with sexual people. Ninny and Sassy are both asexual and in a relationship with each other. Aruna here is hetero-romantic. It's actually really, really common, the most common romantic orientation. And then you have Wojtek, who's a gay asexual. He likes having romantic relationships with the same sex. You get bi-romantics like Kimberly. She's romantically attracted to women or men, but not sexually attracted to either. Some people, like Gaia, describe themselves as panromantic. They can fall in love with any person, male, female, in between, androgynous, or outside the gender binary completely. People like Gaia are more common than you probably realize if you're not in the community. But because a lot of people get really hung up on sex having to be involved in all romantic adult relationships, aromantic people like me seem to fare better as ambassadors from the community, because we don't have to deal with those questions and criticisms. It's bad for the whole community, and the people we're trying to talk to put aromantic people on the stage and draw up this sanitized, uncomplicated version of what asexuality is. Our relationships are just as complicated as sexual people's. We just have different ways of compromising. So, what's left to say? Myth number 10. True asexuals are all well-adjusted and happy, like swankivy. I'm a so-called gold star asexual, and I've been talking to the sexual world about asexuality since before I called it that and years before it even existed. And I've been identifying as asexual or non-sexual since like 1994. You do the math. Despite years and years of hearing all the bullshit, dealing with all the questions, fighting the expectations, and never losing my admittedly idealistic belief that I can be instrumental in spreading the word about asexuality's legitimacy, I'm still here, still happy, still well-adjusted, and taking crap with a smile every day. What's enabled me to have this attitude all my life, though? Well, I think I partially owe my success to the whole gold star asexual phenomenon. I don't get the shit other asexuals get. I don't have the asexuality plus a disability, or a non-normative gender identity, or a social problem, or a complex, or any of the other dozens of things that many members of the community do live with. I realized how easy it had been to hurt them, because they didn't happen to have the traits that I had, or maybe they didn't come from supportive homes like I did, or had all these other things against them that contributed to others' unwillingness to listen to them bearing their souls during their formative years. It takes these people years to shed the layers of shame and confusion and frustration they carry around after not being unassailable all their lives. And then we come along, just us plucky little asexual ambassadors, and we paint this rosy picture of how we may be asexual, but there's nothing else weird or wrong about us, so therefore, asexuality starts to look possible. But for them, they get left out. Erased. Even if behind closed doors in our own communities we open our arms to them and acknowledge their existence and even bolster their confidence, our public message rarely helps them at all. It paints an inaccurate picture of both the average and the exceptional asexual, and it might make it actually even harder in some ways for asexuals with some of these traits to wrest legitimacy from those that they care about. I'm not going to stop speaking up for asexuality and for myself because I think I do it well, and I'm not going to stop describing my experience while I do that, but I'm going to go on record right now saying that I intend to be as inclusive as possible with my message. I'm not perfect, and I'm not unassailable, but asexuality shouldn't be in doubt because of who's claiming it. And I hope to continue the effort to raise up all asexuals as people who are qualified to describe their own feelings without subscribing to the mistaken belief that a person can only be considered asexual as a last resort.